Good morning, everyone. I'm Dana Corson, the Director of Media Relations at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. Thank you for joining us this morning for part one of today's public briefing on 4 reports that were released yesterday as part of the National Academy of Medicine's Advancing Pandemic and Seasonal Influenza Vaccine Preparedness and Response Initiative. If you haven't already, you may download copies of these reports and other supporting materials on the same page that you are viewing this webcast right now. Next slide, please. Those are the links as well, now on your screen. For those of you not familiar with the National Academy's study process, for each requested study, committee members are chosen for their expertise and experience and serve pro bono to carry out the study's statement of task. The reports that result from the study represent the consensus view of the committee and must undergo external peer review before they are released, as did these 4 reports. I'll now turn it over to Victor Dzau, President of the National Academy of Medicine, to kick us off this morning.
Thank you, Dana. I'm so pleased to open the public report briefings for this NAM initiative on pandemic and seasonal influenza vaccine preparedness and response. It's a monumental effort to deliver 4 timely and important consent studies at the same time that's going to be discussed today. Certainly, I appreciate our close relationship with constructive partnership with the Office of Global Affairs at Health and Human Services on this very important critical work. I'd particularly like to thank Larry Kerr, Director of the Office of Pandemic Emerging Threats, Colin Weinberger, Senior Advisor and Team Lead for Influenza and Pandemic Preparedness, and Seth Furry and Adam Essen, the Senior Global Health Officers. Of course, I'd like to acknowledge the staff, Judy Pavin and her team, for outstanding work. They spend long hours tackling this topic, and we see their efforts reflected in these reports. So by way of background, I can tell you that in July 2020, Larry Kerr contacted me and he said, I have an important opportunity for NAM to distill lessons learned from COVID-19 that can be critical advancing future influenza preparedness efforts. Because he pointed out that we're not adequately prepared for a novel pandemic influenza strain, and also we must start implementing the lessons learned from COVID-19. And he's so right. So because the initiative is timely, because the world is focused on combating COVID-19 pandemic, seasonal and pandemic influenza remain an imminent global threat. We've seen how viruses such as SARS-CoV-2 have potential to disrupt the world and the importance of global preparedness response and the willingness to apply rapidly these capabilities to counter new measures. So seasonal pandemic influenza remain an imminent global threat. Now, COVID-19 has enabled the emergence of new capabilities, technologies, collaboration, policy that can also be deployed before and during the next influenza pandemic. Lots of lessons learned. So these 4 reports were developed with that purpose in mind. They underscore that preparedness has to be an ongoing commitment. It can't be a year-to-year or crisis-to-crisis. As we learn from COVID-19 experience, surveillance, supply chain, research infrastructure must be well-resourced before and not in the midst of the next pandemic. So given the global nature of this issue, we agree that this work should be international and complementary to the WHO influenza effort. With this background, we assembled a truly international committee with a range of expertise in global public health from all sectors: government, academia, industry, civil society, and international public health organizations. May I show the next slide, please? So the committee. First, I'd like to thank the committee for their remarkable ability to assess fast-changing landscape and identify and advise on critical issues that require further study. That's captured in Statement of Task. The Statement of Task were used for 4 academy studies we were reviewing today and they make recommendations to improve the global design, composition, clinical trials, production, scale-up, regulatory approval, distribution of vaccines, and post-approval surveillance. And we couldn't have done with those committee. You see the names on it, and I want to thank them profusely. Next slide. So this slide will show you the 4 consent statements that are being released today. One is vaccine research development to advance pandemic and seasonal influenza preparedness response lessons learned from COVID-19. Second is the global resilience supply chains for seasonal and pandemic influenza vaccines. Third is public health lessons for non-vaccine influenza interventions looking past COVID-19. And fourth is countering the pandemic threat through global coordinated vaccines, the influenza imperative. I know the sequence of the slide is different what I'm reading, but you got all of them. I do want to thank the chairs of each consent study for the committee for incredible hard work to produce such impressive and comprehensive reports, such short timelines. They are Peter Sands and Debbie Shrida, Alex Capron and Patty Garcia, Ravi Anupindi and Prashant Yadav, and Keita Bond and Ken DeSabaro. The chairs of this consent committee are here with me today, and they'll discuss the finalized report recommendation, answer any questions that you have. Again, thank you, all of you, for joining us and dedicating your time to this very important work. Thank you. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Loyce Pace. She is the Director of the Office of Global Affairs, OGA, at Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. In her current role, Loyce is responsible for advancing the U.S. international health agenda through multilateral and bilateral forums. She reports directly to the Secretary of HHS, and she is the Office of Global Affairs lead on setting priorities and policies that promote American public health agencies' interests worldwide. Loyce oversees HHS engagement with foreign governments and international institutions, as well as policy-making bodies such as the G7, G20, United Nations General Assembly, and the World Health Assembly. Previously, she served as President and Executive Director of the Global Health Council and was a member of Biden-Harris Transition COVID-19 Advisory Board. Prior to her role at Global Health Council, Loyce spent a decade working with community-based organizations and grassroots leaders in countries across Africa and Asia on campaigns calling for person-centered access to health. She is passionate about equity and inclusion. Loyce, thank you for your support. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to OGA for supporting this work. Over to you.
Threat. And even though we saw a historic decrease in these cases during the COVID-19 pandemic so far, this disease will likely be what we face in another pandemic. And so we feel like we're at a pretty unique moment in our history right now, especially those of us who work in public health. We want to really step back and understand everything that we've lost, but also everything that we've learned throughout this pandemic so far, and take a step back and understand, okay, well, what can we do with these with these lessons, right? And what should we do, or how should we be viewing these innovations, these technologies, these interventions that clearly have something to teach us real time. And so even though we're still in the midst of our response to COVID-19, we recognize the importance of documenting and understanding the very real successes and challenges over the past couple of years that help us understand how to overcome those shortfalls. So our Office of Global Affairs at the Department of Health and Human Services here in the US approached the National Academies to sponsor the pandemic and seasonal influenza vaccine preparedness and response, and specifically harnessing lessons from efforts to mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's the full mouth title of this initiative, recognizing that's been broken up into a few different parts. But we initially approached the academies to focus primarily on vaccines. However, we recognize that this can be applied across a spectrum of response areas, whether that's non-pharmaceutical interventions, supply chains, or broader R&D. Again, I just want to highlight the timeliness of all of this coming forth today, recognizing that we're still having conversations about persistent inequities across access to diagnostics, therapeutics, supplies, as well as vaccines. And of course, in addition to everything that you all will be discussing today around these reports, we at OGA and the Department of Health and Human Services are also having some of these conversations in other forums and critically focused on how we close the equity gap in particular with regards to access to innovations. We're also having broader conversations about the global health security architecture and specifically how the world prepares, not only responds to a pandemic, so that we do have a high degree of readiness and again, incorporate these various lessons learned. So again, thank you for the reports that have come forth from this initiative. We at the Office of Global Affairs at HHS have been happy to support this work. I want to offer my appreciation again to everyone at the National Academies who played a role, and of course, everyone here who contributed. It will not go unnoticed, and of course, will be critically important for our way forward. Thank you.